Hello and welcome to the latest and greatest episode of the Richard Watkins podcast. The podcast where we bring thought leaders and policymakers right to you. So sit back, relax, and get ready to learn something. Before we go, we have to make sure we acknowledge the folks that make this all possible, the Science Policy Action Network. Are you a researcher and you want your research funded, but you know that rates of funding are very low and you want to see funding increased? Get in contact with us. We fight for you to make sure that funding is increased and that federal support for funding is where it needs to be. Or if you're a community organization, or if you're just curious about what is going on because innovation is moving at breakneck speed, holler at us at the Science Policy Action Network. If you're looking to learn more, visit us at www.span-inc.org. That is span-inc.org. Now, with that out of the way, we have a very, very, very special guest with us today, none other than Dr. Charity Watkins. And if that last name sounds familiar, it's because I am her husband. It is absolutely incredible to have a thought leader underneath the same roof. And if her background looks familiar, that is usually where I film the podcast. So we're just really, really excited to have her here today. And even though I've known her for a very long time, I was just blown away by her bio, which I'm going to read to you right now. So check this out. Dr. Charity S. Watkins is a tenure-track assistant professor in the Department of Social Work at North Carolina Central University, holding a BA in sociology, an MSW, and a PhD in social work from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Her research is personally driven, inspired by her battle with peripartum cardiomyopathy, and seeks to address racial disparities in cardiac-related maternal health issues, including improved diagnostics, treatment, and support systems for Black women facing severe maternal morbidity. With her research, advocacy, and professional training as a social worker, Dr. Watkins is committed to enhancing health outcomes for mothers and babies, especially in racially marginalized communities. As a 2022 Duke NCCU Building Interdisciplinary Research Careers in Women's Health, or BIRC, WH, or BIRC, WH, K-12 NIH Career Development Award recipient, Dr. Watkins is conducting a mixed methods study on Black women's experiences with severe cardiovascular maternal morbidity. Her research aims to uncover the long-term physiological or psychosocial effects of facing life-threatening health events while giving birth. Dr. Watkins also seeks to examine and expand the role of social workers in maternal health care delivery and health equity research. In addition to her academic roles, she is involved in maternal health care research and policy, serving on various boards and as a consultant for national research projects funded by organizations like PCORI, NIH, and the American Heart Association. Dr. Watkins also contributes to her community as a women heart champion with the National Coalition for Women with Heart Disease and as a board of director chair for Equity Before Birth, which addresses barriers to vital resources for healthy maternal and infant outcomes. Her diverse roles underscore her dedication to tracking health disparities and advocating for equitable health care for Black women and their families. Dr. Watkins, thank you so much for being with us today. How are you doing today?
I am doing really good. Thank you so much for that wonderful reading of my biography.
Was there anything that I left out?
I'm a mom to an 8-year-old and have been married for almost 11 years now to you.
I have to count my blessings, count my blessings. All right, let's back up just a little bit. Tell us a little bit about, how did you get from point A to point B? I mean, you are a scholar through and through. You're from Rochester, New York. How did you get from Rochester, New York to being a triple Tar Heel, I believe, as the saying goes?
Oh, well, that was quite a journey. And then funny enough, I just went to Rochester for what I would say my 21st high school reunion a couple weeks ago. But I was born and raised in Rochester, and many people from Rochester would kind of make the distinction between being from Rochester and being from one of the towns around Rochester. So I'm from the city, maybe 5 minutes from downtown. I was raised by my mom, Annie Mae Sneed, who was actually from Eastern North Carolina, but made her way up north when she was in the army. And I have an older sister, 15 years older than me, but basically was raised as a only kid at home. Um, I was mostly at home. I didn't really go out that much. I was not outside, and I spent a lot of time, learning different things. I was in different academic, gifted and talented programs ever since elementary school, and was a part of the first class of the International Baccalaureate program at Wilson Magnet High School in Rochester. And then decided that I did not want to stay up there anymore for a number of different reasons. One being the weather. I do not like snow. It was very cold, and I just wanted to experience life somewhere else and wanted to also to be closer to family. So I decided to apply to several schools here. I'm not going to mention all of them, but UNC Chapel Hill was where I landed. Actually came down that summer a little early, and my aunt, I remember dropping me off by the hospital, said, "Good luck with getting to orientation." So I never visited UNC before coming here. I literally just was browsing through one of those Princeton books looking for schools in North Carolina, and that's how I made my decision. So yeah, it was luck of the draw, and luckily it worked in my favor.
You did sociology when you first came to Carolina. Is that right? I know I just read it, but I just want to make sure I got that right. So you did
Yeah.
sociology. What were you interested then? Were you interested in maternal health at that point? And if not, what were you interested in?
Yeah, so I actually applied to undergrad with the thought that I was going to do like some work around marriage and family therapy. I was interested in educational outcomes. What I learned later on that was called academic resilience. So how Black children were able to succeed in school despite experiences of racism, despite experiences of social economic disadvantage, and what parents did in order to promote that academic success. So I actually started off as a psychology major, which I would say probably 50% of undergrads begin as, but then I found myself falling asleep in class. And I used to sit in the front of the class and would fall asleep right there in front of the instructor's face. And I felt so bad, but it just wasn't interesting to me to like hear just about the individual. And so later on, I switched to sociology, and one of the first classes I remember from that major was a class where we analyzed the family dynamics of The Simpsons. And I was like, oh, so this is what makes more sense to me. I can hear a lot about the brain, but I need to know what it means in context. And so that's why sociology felt like a better fit for me. And then I ended up adding the minor social economic justice because that justice piece was definitely something that spoke near and dear to my heart. And I think it's because of my name, and somehow Manifest Destiny allowed for me to, really pursue the idea of love and justice, and just wanting better for everybody.
Oh, that is huge, yo. For all those folks out there that, may be listening to this and they might be in a class that they think is boring and they fall asleep, just know you can still be successful and fall asleep in class. Yo, shout out to that. Yo, so you then go on to pursue your master's. Did you go directly from your undergrad into master's? What was that transition like? And just like I asked you with your undergrad stuff, what what were you studying, for your master's, and how did you make that transition?
Oh man, trial and error. I wouldn't say error, trials. A lot of trials and tribulations. So after graduating from undergrad, I was going to take a gap year, um, but that year turned into 4. And I wouldn't say it was a waste of time because I actually got a lot of experience during that time. So I started off working for an organization that still exists today, I believe, but I was working with older adults with developmental disabilities and basically helping with, their basic needs, but also with, social activities and things like that. And I did that for 6 months before switching to a group home setting or level 3 setting for adolescent girls who are experiencing different psychosocial challenges. And so I did that for some time. I moved up a little bit in that organization and then switched to becoming a associate professional, I believe was my title, where I did community support, basically going all around Durham County and working with kids of various ages from as young as like 5 to 18 almost. And then I was also doing intensive in-home where I worked with families around issues that children were facing. And so that gave me a clear sense of, this feels good working directly with people, but I still needed to figure out whether psychology or social work was, the direction I needed to go into. And so one of my final jobs before applying to grad school was with a private practice that provides psychological and psychiatric services. And in that setting, I was at first intern. So I always had multiple jobs. I mean, even during the time when I was a community support professional and all of those other positions, I was probably also working security at that time, still on campus. And then while doing this internship, was still working community support, and then later on transitioned to being the office manager for this practice. And then that's when I started to learn about the inner workings of psychological, services, and realized I'm not really seeing people who look like me, coming in here. Most folks have, a lot of resources and are able to pay $125 out of pocket with no problem. But I wanted to see people who looked like me, who had issues similar to what I experienced as a kid or as a young adult. And so that's when I decided to apply to the Masters of Social Work program at UNC and luckily got in by the grace of God. And also during that time, I was reaching out to folks. I was like, hey, I think I'm interested in this. I don't know exactly if I have the experience that will make me a strong candidate, but I was accepted. And then, that's when the real work began.
So what was that work? What were some of the questions that you were asking at that time of the field of social work, as a master student? Like, if you can kind of, teleport your mind back into like that first day of your master's program, what were some of the questions that were burning inside of you?
Well, I would say the questions began, of course, before I even applied. Um, One of the questions that I had when I was working intensive in-home is how do we know that these interventions that we are reading off of a paper and having to do step by step, how do we know it's supposed to work with, the family that I'm serving right now? I got a little fed up with doing things just because I was told without understanding it. And so I was like, I need to do some research. I need to figure out how to actually inform these interventions and like be able to see diversity and inclusion of different experiences within these interventions. And so that's what really inspired me to go back to school And then on that first day, realizing that I was one of very few Black students, I was like, wow. Now I see a lot of Black professors, and it was amazing to be able to learn from, folks who are, pioneers in my field. But I was like, man, there's not that many Black students here either. And so I just realized that, hey, I have something to give here, and also a lot to learn. But, it's really for me about how do I take what I learn and apply it to different situations, and how do I make it so that it can enact change and not just kind of be, individually beneficial.
Wow. So it sounds like you wanted to, contribute to the body of knowledge that informs practice instead of just being plugged into, an already established way of thinking and then, just kind of, plug and play. But then also you were just talking about what it was like to kind of being, I guess, in a minority, in a master's program. I've had a lot of experiences, just out and about where people come up to me and they're like, "Are you Charity's husband?" I'm like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah." And I don't know who they are. And they're just like singing your praise. And like, listen, I wouldn't even be where I'm at today if it wasn't for Charity. I wouldn't even be, and they're like, this is like in public. I'm like at Lowe's. And I'm like, I don't know what to say. So talk a little bit about, some of the work that you were involved in as a master's student that ended up impacting students yet to have come through the program. What was some of the legacy left behind by your work at UNC's master's program in social work?
Oh man, that was hard work. And I didn't even realize what the implications of it were going to be, of course, until afterwards. But starting off, even my first year in the master's program, which is typically 2 years unless you do the distance education program, I sought opportunities to be a leader in my program because I found myself leading anyway, in different ways. I was that student who always raised her hand, like, but I don't know about that, but I, and so I was always asking questions and what some people would see as challenging ways of thinking. And I said I was offering other ways of thinking, in addition to what we were being taught. And so as a tri-chair for the let me see, student organization for social work. So also I can't remember how it was, what the acronym stood for completely, but in that role, we started, talking with other students, and we were asking them about their experience in the master's program. And we found out, later on that some of these conversations had been happening well before we came. And now we're just kind of repeating the same conversations. But now it's time for us to move forward than just, talking, but we actually need to see some action happening. And so we began holding town hall meetings or dialogues. And we always began by inviting students, staff, and faculty, as well as administration, to be a part of these conversations because we know that everyone would need to join in order for it to actually stick, in order for change to actually be implemented. And it really took off after Michael Brown's murder. And that was when the Black Lives Matter movement really started to like become more apparent here at home. And we were having, conversations amongst ourselves as students, but then when we received the response from our dean, it was shocking. Here we are, a school of social work, but we don't seem to be modeling the values and ethics and principles that we say we are going to follow as professionals. We have a code of ethics that we uphold for our profession, but how the murder of Michael Brown was described by our administrator was not in line with that. And so there were pockets of conversations happening all over the place among students, but then we started to coalesce and we were like, okay, well, it's time for us to have some conversations, real conversations. And so we started reaching out to faculty members. We also started reaching out to the larger university Ombuds office, Office of Diversity, Multicultural and Inclusion. We started just trying to figure out how can we change the idea that racism is not is something from the past, is something that is only like very direct, like using the N word. Like it, there's other ways that it comes about, including structural racism, and so we were having conversations with administrators until they kind of decided I'm kind of done with this conversation. Like there's other things that we need to be doing. But we as students saw that this was um, critical for our professional development and for the development of students who came after us. Because if we're not able to address issues of racism within our own system, how are we going to address it outside? And so we, again, having dialogues, community dialogues, we recorded them and shared them. We reported out results. We came up with different strategic goals for how we can actually embed racial equity within our curriculum, within our basically our campus environment. And we proposed them and we, presented them to numerous folks. And what we saw is that a lot of folks were not eager to change because the current system worked for them. But for those that it didn't work for, we were very eager to get something changed. And so this is over years that this is happening, but it came to a head when in 2017, I was a doctoral student at that point, and I saw every year the cohort that was coming in every single year. Now, I came in with a cohort that included myself and two other Black women, a male from China, and one white female and a white male. So we had a pretty diverse cohort, six of us. After that, 5 years went by before I saw another face that looked like mine. 5. And so I waited until that cohort for 2017, that new cohort of doctoral students came in, and I saw again no one who looked like me. And I said, you know what? I'm done. And I had been trying to work within systems. I was holding meetings and breakfast meetings and afternoon meetings and follow-up emails and all of this stuff. I was doing a lot of free work of DEI for our school, but it became too much because at that time I was also a new parent. I was also working on my comprehensive exams. I was still trying to graduate from my doctoral program. And writing the letter to the editor of the Daily Tar Heel was my next move because I said, I'm giving up this effort. It's not mine to carry alone. And when I wrote that, there was a lot of discussion that came from it. There were questions about whether I was telling the truth, whether my claims of our school having racism and that being demonstrated not only through the admission of or the lack of admission of Black students, but also through our curriculum, also through what professors were teaching in the doctoral program. It actually later on, after a lot of criticism, after a lot of isolation, um, I, I was struggling for a period of time to get out of the program because it did not feel like it was mine anymore. I felt targeted. I felt as if I wasn't receiving the same support as other students because I spoke out about this issue. And it wasn't until probably within the last couple of years that the contribution I made to the school was actually acknowledged as a contribution and not a problem. It was when I was nominated to be the first recipient of the recent alumni uh, Distinguished Alumni Award from the school, and being given that from the current dean, the first Black woman to serve as dean of our school in 100 years of history. That's when I started to actually see the fruits of my labor. It was a lot on me. It was stressful. It was hurtful. But being able to see more students who look like me now, being able to see faculty who look like me teaching in the doctoral program, being able to see curriculum that talks about race directly is the fruit of my labor. So I'm humbled by any time someone says that I wouldn't have been in the program without you, because I think you would have, but it's just whether the program would have acknowledged your gifts. Um, I I I don't know. It's still something I'm grappling with, but it is now something I'm very proud of, and I would do it again.
And that story is absolutely incredible because it does highlight the ability for an individual to change an institution and for an individual who may feel marginalized to wield institutional power, to leverage, the power of the free press, which is absolutely incredible, to just change the landscape of an institution that has been around, and correct me if I'm wrong, has been around longer than that individual has been alive. Um, I mean, that's just an incredible story, and it's just one that I hope people hear, because oftentimes a person feels as though, how can I change the institution? I'm just one person. I've got this, that, and the other going on. I'm just, not. But something that strikes me different about you, I mean, there are countless people who've come before you, um, but I think you had this combination of an idea of what should be coupled with courage, and that is unique. I think that that courage element is the part that's missing. There's oftentimes the ideas are there, that courage piece is missing. So after hearing that, no wonder people just run up on me in public places singing your praise, because they probably have never seen courage in that way and power manifested in an individual who is just one person, and that's inspiring. That's quite inspiring.
Mhm.
Um, I want to talk a little bit, stay on the path of, you're in a doctoral program at this point. What were you researching now? What were some of your questions now, having gone through, what you went through, and then you're still working to kind of change the institution at this point. What were some of your research questions, and what questions were you asking of the field at this time, as a doctoral student?
Yeah, so my dissertation was focused on academic resilience, and much of my research, I mean, anytime I've done research, it has been informed by my own experiences. Like the research question is my life. So I was wondering how me, as a first generation college student, how did I manage to get to the point of being able to go to one of the top schools of social work and become a part of the very small percentage of people overall who have a PhD. Like how did that happen? And I wanted to know specifically what did my mom do in order to, promote that in me? Like what were some of the messages that she told me about education? What were some of the behaviors she did to ensure that I did my work, or that I was engaged in my education and took ownership of it? what were some of the messaging around my racial identity, and how did that contribute to my ability to do well in school? Because so many of us are told you got to work twice as hard to get half as far. But I remember some of that, but then that in itself could also be what stops you, because you always are going to have to work hard. Is that something you want to commit to? I just wonder, like, how did I get here? I don't always I never ever contribute anything to just myself. There's always people around me supporting me. There's always people um who are motivating me, who are encouraging me, inspiring me. And so I was just like, what did she do? That was what I focused on for my dissertation, and actually going into my first couple of years as an assistant professor at North Carolina Central in the Department of Social Work. But then um, in 2016, as you know, is when there was a lot of life changes happening. I was working on my comps and actually didn't pass it the first time, and had a lot of questions about why I didn't pass it. And then there were, some struggles that we were going through in terms of our family, and thinking of your mom. And then going into having our daughter in February 2016, only to be admitted into the hospital in April. So there was just so much that had happened within that time, that I started to think, especially as I engaged more within my community here in Durham, there are already people who are doing amazing work around education. We have Village of Wisdom. We have a number of different folks who are doing amazing work. And I just said, I need to find a different way to contribute. I want to support those organizations, but I don't need to be at the forefront, because we already have amazing people doing that work. But where else can I contribute? And then I started to reflect on my own personal experience with maternal morbidity, and realized that's my contribution, because that's something I have to live with every single day. That's something that has changed the entire trajectory of my life. And every time I take a medication, every night, every time I'm checking my blood pressure, every time I see a cardiologist, it's apparent to me that this is something that needs to be a focal point of my research, because it happens more often than it doesn't.
Yeah, humility is one thing, but quite frankly, I'm not aware of anyone who does it quite like you. I mean, just honest. Like, for instance, you were talking about the organizations doing incredible work that were already out there. One of those organizations that you didn't mention just then, but I read it in your bio, is Equity Before Birth, which you serve as chairwoman for. Tell me a little bit about the organization. How did it come to pass? What does it aspire to do? And what do you see for the organization in the future?
Oh yeah, I was definitely going to talk about EBV. As I would say, as a consequence of um, what I experienced personally. But Equity Before Birth is a unique, community rooted organization, nonprofit, based here in Durham, serving 5 counties, I believe that's correct right now, and led by our amazing executive director, Joy Spencer. And we are only approaching 4 years old at this point. We are still toddlers in the nonprofit world, but we are movers and shakers. Equity Before Birth does some amazing work that really should be modeled, or models for other organizations. um, EBB meets uh, folks where they are, and it asks the community, what do you need, versus telling them what they need. And so based on, actually what happened during 2020 with the COVID pandemic, the needs of birthing people became very apparent, especially when we're thinking about the shortages in formula, also the lack of social supports, closing down of schools. Like, it was a crisis. And what the one of the co-founders describes, Emmy Idy, actually says that she said that it was clear that she had the privilege of being able to have her children taken care of, but then she started to ask the questions about what about everyone else. And so Equity Before Birth was born from that, with Joy serving as the first executive director. And we actually, I would say the staff are the core, the heart of the organization. I'm just here to support them. But being able to, meet critical gaps, even gaps created by systems that I'm a part of as a social worker, so such as social services, we're being able to connect individuals to culturally affirming doula services, midwifery care. We're connecting them to parenting support classes. We're connecting them to birthing classes overall. We're helping them with receiving and obtaining essential baby items, cribs, diapers, strollers. We're also have developed a program that seeks to meet the needs of those who do not have parental leave by providing supplemental income to families in a cohort model. And so we are trusting individuals to know how they need support to be able to communicate that. We're also trying our best to um, make sure that any supports that we are connecting them to are acknowledging that um, equity, racial equity is at the core of their work, that is going to be affirmed, that gender is going to be honored, how family dynamics play out in different ways are going to be honored. And so it's really my privilege to serve on the board and to be able to brag about EBB serving 250 families within this short period of time, being able to give over $500,000 in support to families like that. That's amazing. And it's only because of Joy and EBB staff members. And volunteers. Please let me say, volunteers are amazing. And, we really could use more support. So if you want to donate to Equity Before Birth, please go to our website, www.equitybeforebirth.com. We are always open to donations, and it allows for us to serve the families that we want to continue to serve and support.
Yeah, like huge shout out to that. Also, is Equity Before Birth on any social media platforms, or can people just find them on their website? What are the social media
Oh,
platforms?
oh, we're on Instagram, we're on Facebook, we're on LinkedIn, we're on X, we're anywhere where you can go. So yes, we are on all of those platforms, and it's very easy to donate. And you can also set up recurring donations as well.
People would, also be interested in following you, especially after your recent appearance on the news, where you are talking about your contributions to policy reform and policy initiatives, mainly the Monuments piece of legislation. What is that all about? I've heard about it on the federal level. Talk about it a little bit as it pertains to state legislation and some of the people that you're working with.
Sure. So I want to first start off by shouting out State Senator Natalie Murdoch, who is always a invaluable advocate for maternal health. The Momnibus bill here in North Carolina, I have to say that we are the second state in the country, after California, to present a state level Momnibus bill. Now, there is a federal Momnibus bill that is co-sponsored by Representative Lauren Underwood, as well as Representative Alma Adams. And what we are proposing here is three-part bill. So it actually includes several components, one being providing maternal health providers, and that isn't just the OBs, that's everyone who interacts with birthing people in a hospital setting or an outpatient setting, providing them with implicit bias training. Because what we realize is that many people don't even realize what kinds of pre-existing notions that they have about individuals just based on their race. There has been evidence, and it has since then been corrected in some ways, that Black people are viewed as having higher pain tolerance, of not telling the truth when they have pain, or when they say that they have pain. Also, being mistreated and their wishes not being honored, also delays in treatment and diagnosis. There's evidence for all of that. And so implicit bias training will help with addressing some of those things on a individual provider level, because folks need to be aware of how this plays out. Also understand that because we are all drinking the same water and breathing the same air, no one is immune to bias. We all have them. We just have to acknowledge how they play out and how we interact with individuals, especially on a professional level. It also, the Omnibus Bill also includes funding grants to community-based organizations. And this is something that I really, really care a lot about, because as someone who sits at the intersection of community organizations as well as academic institutions, we got to do better to support community organizations, because that's where the ideas are coming from. That's where the ideas of community informed research, that's where it's coming from. Community-based participatory research is mostly led by community organizations that are already in the communities in which research is being done. There's so much that universities and research institutions can learn from community organizations, but community organizations need the funding to do it. And so the Omnibus Bill also poses that. There's also a need for doula services. Like, there doesn't need to be just one model for how you bring a baby into the world. There needs to be opportunities for people to make choices, whether that is choosing to have a doula in the room while you are giving birth. Now, a doula does not substitute an OB, but the person who's in that role serves as another ear for when those nurses or doctors are providing you with insights into what's going on with you and your baby during labor and delivery. They are supports from pregnancy on through 1 year or more after childbirth. That's when the time occurs when many of the maternal deaths are happening, is after that 6-week mark. And so, like, doulas are critical for care, especially care for individuals who these systems have not been designed to serve, but more to learn through experimentation, through all of these other very problematic ways that maternal health has come to hand now. So those are just some of the things that the Omnibus Bill can do. We just need to show and gain the support to have it funded. Like, we as a country are failing all birthing people, because 84.2% of maternal deaths are preventable. 84.2. It does unfortunately disproportionately affect Black birthing people, but we're talking about numbers that apply for everyone. Like, we have the highest rate of maternal deaths and maternal morbidity compared to other high-income industrialized countries. Excuse me. We also experienced an increase in maternal deaths over the last few years, and we're talking about in the 2020s. Like, we're not talking about in the 1920s, 2020s. Current times, we had recently experienced an increase in maternal deaths, despite spending the most in healthcare. And so this is just pointing out that maternal health is not just a Black issue. It's an issue for all people. Everyone has to be born, as far as I know. And so this issue around maternal health and maternal health equity is beneficial for everyone because it's not a partisan issue. It is a human rights issue.
Well said, well said. So, all right, let me get this right. So you have leadership role in the nonprofit sector. You're also engaged in policy reform. And if I do recall correctly, you're also still an academic. You are a faculty member at North Carolina Central University as well in the Department of Social Work. All right, you know, when I first moved to Durham, you cannot deny the impact that the institution that is North Carolina Central University has on the culture and the vibrancy of this town. What is it like working with the next generation of leaders who look at you and they're like, all right, I'm going to be able to do what she does. I'm going to be able to build on it. What is it like working with the next generation of movers and shakers and thought leaders?
Well, first, I would say when I first got to Central, and it still happens occasionally, I was definitely mistaken as a student, which is definitely, hey, I appreciate it. I'll take it any day. And it was just interesting for students to I don't know. For me, I had such a mix of students. I had students who were just coming out of undergrad, first year, or not, maybe not first year. Well, there's some first year graduate students, of course, but then there are also students who were working in the field and then came back. And so there is like second career students. And some of them were older than me, and they would say, I can't believe I'm learning from you. You just got here on this earth. But they took it seriously. And so I was able to meet such a different mix of students, especially compared to my experience at UNC. I saw students who, were third generation, fourth generation college students. I also saw first generation college students. I saw students who were supporting their families while also going to school. I saw students who were just like, I don't know, just so involved and doing well at school. And they looked at me as, oh, this young professor, does she really know what she's talking about? But later on, after just one semester, they did start to develop more of a stance that, oh, Dr. Watkins, she's tough, but she's fair. That was what I remember a student writing on my evaluations, that I'm tough, but I'm fair. And I always had and convey to my students that I have high expectations for you. I'm never going to think that you are only capable of this much. I'm going to think you're capable of this much, and I'm here to support you. I go into my class on the first day, all of my classes, and tell them my motto. I say, I'm not going to work harder for you than you work for yourself. If you work hard, I'm working hard right next to you. I'm here to support you not only as a student, but as a human being, because I understand that what happens outside of this classroom can be just as detrimental to you as what's happening here. And so if you are struggling with a test, let's talk about what's going on. If you didn't study the material, is it because you didn't have enough time? Is it that you were distracted? Is it that you also had to work? Like, tell me what's going on so I can see how I can help you. And so the students have taught me patience. They have taught me empathy. They have taught me how to think differently about a lot of different things. They have taught me life experiences that I probably would never experience myself, but how much they have gained from those experiences. And, you know, working with colleagues who are also very different has been amazing. I've just learned a lot from my students, and really grateful for the opportunity to be in the role of teaching them. It's definitely an honor. I would say there's a lot of different ways that being in academia is considered higher level, but it really is, I would say it's more of a humbling experience than anything else because your students can tell you about yourself as well. So I'm just grateful to be in the role of seeing and supporting the next generation of social workers, next generation of leaders, political activists, any and everything in terms of roles.
So from one iconic institution to another, right here in Durham, you work with both North Carolina Central University and Duke. Um, and you conduct research, if I understand correctly, um, in both institutions or working in collaboration with Duke University as an assistant professor of North Carolina Central University. What is that research like? What questions are you asking, and what are some of the things that you hope to find?
Yeah, so I am a Birch Scholar, which is the Building Interdisciplinary Research Careers in Women's Health, NIH Career Development Award. Um, I am and have been for the last couple of years working on a mixed methods project that has changed in terms of its aims. But what I realized over time is that I was drifting into a lane that was not mine. And so got back into my lane of social work and asking the question about how can we examine, identify what the roles are of social workers within maternal health care, but also how can we expand those roles to address the issues around racial bias within maternal health care. And so I started asking that question of how is social work integrated into maternal health care? What are the barriers to that integration? What are some of the issues within our profession that makes it difficult for us to be integrated into maternal health care? What are some issues within the sphere of healthcare itself that makes it difficult for social workers to be viewed as professionals with expertise? And so right now I have been looking at electronic health record data in order to extract data from clinical social work visits, seeing how often clinical social workers are being referred to patients who have experienced cardiac related severe maternal morbidity. How often are we being even called into the room? How are we being called? What are the reasons for those referrals? Oftentimes, social workers within maternal health are being called for more punitive reasons, which is going to affect the kind of relationship social workers have with community members. We're called in when there's a concern around substance use disorders. We are called in when there's issues or concerns around child welfare. And so, if the relationships that are being formed between social workers and community members or patients is negative, that means how we serve them and how we interact with them beyond pregnancy, we're not going to be viewed as um, uh, trusted folks that can work together with them. We're seen as someone who's policing them as parents. And so, what I really want to do is work on changing that dynamic, which requires us to acknowledge our history in maternal health care, the roles that we have played in terms of, for instance, eugenics movement, but also in addition to that, acknowledging how we can play a larger role now and stepping up to that plate, kind of exhibiting that moral courage that you were talking about to address issues around how patients are being empowered or being helping them to recognize their power and being able to ask for better services from providers. How we can encourage patients to ask them to document different ways that they're diagnosing them in order to carry that information to another provider. How are we able as social workers to help mediate patient provider communication so that we are able to highlight when there's implicit bias happening? How are we also able to work at the macro level to change structures within healthcare? How can we help with developing a standard of care that has racial equity built into it from the very start? So I'm working on a topic that is very I don't see a lot of information about it, which is good for me. But it is something that is still in the works. And I think with the larger focus on maternal health care, This is the time to make this effort come to fruition, but it's also the time in terms of our focus on diversity, equity, and engagement and reproductive justice.
Fantastic, fantastic. I've learned a lot from you that I didn't know before, right? So maybe I need to have all of my family members on the podcast so I can
Yes.
learn stuff about them that I should know. But I will say this, because you just have such an amazing career, such an extraordinary and inspiring professional life and journey. Um, I try to ask as many questions as possible, right? But I just can't ask them all, right? Were there any questions or any topics that you were hoping to discuss that I just didn't ask you a question about? Here's an opportunity for you to pose the question that you hope that I would ask and then answer it yourself, right? Because I just don't want to leave any stone unturned because you have a truly amazing story. And I just think the audience needs to just hear about your work, your research, your trajectory. It's just absolutely incredible. But yeah, what questions should I have asked that I didn't ask?
I would say, outside of my research and kind of my formal roles, as well as, outside of the community engagement role, there are other roles that I serve in, including Women Heart, which you mentioned in my bio. I became a Women Heart champion in 2018. Also, in terms of the work I've done with the Society for Improving Diagnosis in Medicine, Patients for Patient Safety. Um, Oh, done a lot of different presentations all across the country. Actually did one today for Interclerkship Day at Thomas Jefferson University. I just really want to end by stating anyone can use their voice. Anyone. Yes, it can be uncomfortable. I actually started off in elementary school with a stutter, and did not always feel comfortable even reading out loud to my class. But now here I am, being able to speak for big audiences, small audiences, local, national. Um, Anyone can use their voice. And so I just want to end by stressing that. And your story is worth telling. And also, I would say one last note, back that ask up. So, what I mean by that is when people are asking patients who have lived experience to share their stories, don't just ask them to share, provide some support for when they share that story. Sometimes it's financial support because their stories are a form of data that they are sharing with you. So usually we don't just get data for free. So please back that ask up by providing some support. Also asking about how does it feel for that individual to relive that trauma, and consider that before asking folks to share their story. So that's just what my tidbit would be. Not necessarily a question, but just something I want to reiterate.
Wow. Thank you so much for the time that you have taken out of your day to be with me, to be with us. Thank you for the journey that you have committed yourself to, from a student, from a daughter in Rochester to a student falling asleep in class at UNC as an undergraduate, right? Sociology, then going to your master's program, using your voice, displaying and showing and harnessing courage to create a legacy, to change the trajectory of an entire institution, showing others that they can do that, then going on to defend your dissertation, to become a PhD and inspiration to others, then to contribute to future generations and generations yet to have come with your role as an assistant professor at North Carolina Central University and working with Duke University. And then not only that, to working to inform policies, to making sure your voice is heard, to talking about how stories and reliving traumatic experiences can be just that, traumatic, yet and still you do it all the time. And there are countless of people who look at that and who are inspired and who feel seen, from hearing about your journey and your struggles and your obstacles to the work that you do in the leadership of Equity Before Birth to the countless other organizations that you work with, including your work as a heart advocate. Say it again. I just don't want to get it right. A women's heart,
Women Heart Champion.
a women heart champion. I am blessed, honored, and privileged to call myself your husband. But moreover, I am very grateful to live in a world where people like you exist. Dr. Charity Watkins, thank you so much for being with us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I guess I'll
All
see you
right.
later.
Absolutely. Take care. Bye.